The silence in Judge Judy's courtroom was deafening, broken only by the hum of studio lights and the quiet shuffling of papers. But in exactly 47 seconds, this peaceful moment would explode into the most shocking meltdown in daytime television history. Karen Thompson, a 42-year-old suburban mother from Westchester County, sat rigidly in the plaintiff's chair, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping her designer Louis Vuitton purse like a weapon. Her blonde hair was styled to perfection, her makeup flawless, and her sense of entitlement radiating from every fiber of her being. She had no idea that she was about to make television history for all the wrong reasons. Across from her sat the legendary Judge Judy Siland, 81 years old and sharper than a surgical blade, her steel-gray eyes scanning the case documents with the precision of someone who had demolished over 12,000 litigants in her courtroom. Judge Judy had seen every type of entitled person imaginable, but she had never encountered someone quite like Karen Thompson. What neither the audience nor Karen herself knew was that this wasn't just any ordinary property dispute case. Hidden in Judge Judy's files was a piece of information so damaging, so utterly devastating to Karen's credibility, that it would transform this simple civil case into a criminal matter within minutes. The tension began to build as Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly annoyed that Judge Judy wasn't immediately taking her side. Karen had come to court expecting the same treatment she received everywhere else: immediate compliance with her demands and instant validation of her complaints. She had no idea that Judge Judy had already uncovered the truth about her fraudulent insurance claim from 3 years ago, or that court security had been quietly alerted about Karen's history of threatening legal professionals. What happened in the next 47 seconds would send shockwaves across America and prove that some people's sense of entitlement knows absolutely no bounds. "I don't care who you think you are." Karen's voice suddenly pierced the courtroom air. Her face flushed with rage as she stood up and pointed an accusatory finger directly at Judge Judy. "I want to speak to your manager right now. You can't talk to me like that. I have rights and I demand respect." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. The courtroom audience gasped in collective disbelief. The bailiff's hand moved instinctively toward his handcuffs. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed with the cold precision of someone who had just witnessed the end of Karen's freedom. But Judge Judy's response didn't just destroy Karen's case. It exposed a web of lies, fraud, and criminal behavior that would land Karen in handcuffs before the commercial break. What nobody in that courtroom knew, including Karen herself, was that she had just committed contempt of court while already being investigated for insurance fraud, making her outburst not just disrespectful, but potentially felonious. The 47 seconds that followed would become the most viral courtroom moment in Internet history. And by the time the dust settled, Karen Thompson would discover that some judges don't have managers. They have the power to make your worst nightmares come true. This wasn't just another Judge Judy case about a property line dispute between neighbors. This was the moment when the most entitled woman in America walked into the courtroom of the most powerful judge on television, completely unaware that her past was about to collide with her present in the most devastating way possible. Karen Thompson thought she was coming to court to collect a few thousand from her neighbor over a fence dispute. She had no idea she was walking into a trap that had been 3 years in the making, set by her own lies and Judge Judy's legendary investigative team. What Karen didn't know was that Judge Judy's producers had received an anonymous tip about Karen's fraudulent insurance claims just days before filming. The same entitled attitude that had led Karen to scream at restaurant managers, berate retail workers, and threaten school principals had also convinced her that she could outsmart insurance companies and the legal system itself. She thought her $50,000 fake slip-and-fall claim from 2021 was buried in paperwork and forgotten. She was wrong. Judge Judy's team had connected the dots between Karen's current case and her criminal past, and they had been quietly building a case that would destroy her life on live television. The stakes couldn't have been higher. On one side sat Karen Thompson, a woman so consumed by her own sense of superiority that she genuinely believed she could intimidate a federal judge with threats and demands.
She had spent her entire adult life manipulating systems, bullying service workers, and using her privilege to get whatever she wanted. Today, she expected nothing different. On the other side, Judge Judy Silent, a woman who had spent 25 years putting criminals behind bars and another 25 years exposing fraudsters on national television. She had the evidence, she had the authority, and she had the power to end Karen's reign of terror once and for all. Before we dive into this incredible courtroom disaster that left Karen in handcuffs and the entire nation speechless, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of the explosive legal drama we cover. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this entitled meltdown transforms from a simple civil case into a criminal investigation that exposes years of fraud and deception. The next few minutes of footage became the most shared courtroom video in internet history for a reason. By the end of this confrontation, one woman would be led away in handcuffs, while millions of Americans cheered. One would be vindicated as the ultimate defender of justice and respect. And the entire country would witness what happens when someone's sense of entitlement meets a force more powerful than their ability to intimidate and manipulate. This is the story of how 47 seconds of pure entitlement changed 2 lives forever, and reminded America that some people really do get exactly what they deserve. To understand how Karen Thompson became the most hated woman in America in just 47 seconds, you need to know the twisted path that led her to Judge Judy's courtroom. Karen wasn't born entitled. She was carefully crafted into a monster by years of getting away with increasingly outrageous behavior. At 42, she had perfected the art of manipulation, intimidation, and fraud to such a degree that she genuinely believed herself untouchable. Living in her $800,000 Westchester County home with her investment banker husband Richard, Karen had built an empire of entitlement that was about to crash down in the most spectacular way possible. Karen's reign of terror began innocently. Enough with typical suburban mom complaints about school lunches and soccer schedules. But somewhere along the way, she discovered that raising her voice, demanding managers, and threatening lawsuits got her exactly what she wanted. The local Starbucks had her coffee ready before she even ordered it, terrified of another one of her legendary meltdowns. Target managers would appear at the first sign of her blonde hair entering the store, immediately offering discounts and apologies for problems that didn't even exist. Restaurant owners would comp entire meals just to avoid the scene they knew Karen would create if anything wasn't perfect. But Karen's entitlement went far beyond typical customer complaints. She had mastered the art of fraud with the precision of a career criminal. The 2021 slip and fall incident that Judge Judy's team had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. She had filed 17 different insurance claims over the past 5 years, ranging from fake car accidents to fabricated home damage. She had turned fraud into a lucrative side business, collecting over $200,000 in fraudulent payouts while maintaining her image as a respectable suburban mother. Her method was simple but effective. She would research insurance companies' claim processes, identify their weaknesses, and exploit them with manufactured emergencies and fake injuries. The incident that brought her to Judge Judy's courtroom was classic Karen behavior taken to its logical extreme. When her neighbor, elderly Mrs. Chen, installed a fence that was perfectly legal and properly surveyed, Karen decided she didn't like where it was placed, despite the fence being entirely on Mrs. Chen's property.
Karen convinced herself that it violated her aesthetic rights and demanded $5,000 in damages for the emotional distress it caused her. When Mrs. Chen politely refused to move a legal fence from her own property, Karen did what she always did. She escalated. She filed a lawsuit, hired an expensive lawyer, and prepared to destroy a 78-year-old immigrant woman's life over a fence that wasn't even on her property. What made Karen truly dangerous wasn't just her willingness to lie and cheat. It was her absolute conviction that she was always the victim. In her twisted worldview, she wasn't a fraud or a bully. She was a strong woman standing up for herself against a world that didn't appreciate her worth. She had convinced herself that insurance companies owed her money for the inconvenience of living in an imperfect world. She believed that service workers existed solely to cater to her needs. She was certain that judges, like everyone else, would simply bend to her will once she applied enough pressure. Karen's confidence was absolute as she entered Judge Judy's courtroom that day. She had never lost a case before because she had never faced real opposition. Every manager had eventually given her what she wanted. Every insurance company had eventually paid out. Every authority figure had eventually backed down. She had spent 5 years building a perfect record of getting her way through intimidation and manipulation. She expected Judge Judy to be just another pushover in a black robe who would quickly see things her way once Karen explained how important she was. She was about to learn that some people can't be intimidated, some authority figures can't be manipulated, and some judges have the power to turn your worst day into your last day of freedom. If Karen Thompson had done even 5 minutes of research before walking into that courtroom, she would have immediately dropped her case, returned the money she had stolen from insurance companies, and probably left the country. Because Judge Judith Sheindlin isn't just any television personality or arbitrator. She is, quite literally, the most powerful and feared legal authority in American entertainment history. At 81 years old, Judge Judy had spent over 5 decades destroying the lives of liars, fraudsters, and entitled criminals with such precision and effectiveness that even federal prosecutors studied her methods. Karen was about to discover that she had chosen to intimidate the one person in America who was absolutely immune to intimidation. Judge Judy's path to legendary status began in the mean streets of Brooklyn, where she learned that respect isn't given, it's earned through intelligence, preparation, and the willingness to destroy anyone who tries to play games with you. After graduating from New York Law School in 1965, she spent the next 25 years as a family court judge in Manhattan, handling the most difficult, dangerous, and desperate cases in the American legal system. These weren't civil disputes about fences or parking spaces. These were life-and-death situations involving child abuse, domestic violence, custody battles, and criminal behavior that would make most people lose faith in humanity entirely. During her quarter-century on the bench, Judge Judy developed a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of criminals and fraudsters throughout New York City. Defense attorneys would literally advise their clients to plead guilty rather than face Judge Sheindlin in court, knowing that she had an almost supernatural ability to detect lies, expose fraud, and deliver justice with surgical precision. She had sent thousands of criminals to prison, removed hundreds of children from abusive homes, and personally confronted some of the most dangerous people in America without ever backing down or showing an ounce of fear. What made Judge Judy truly legendary wasn't just her legal knowledge or her courtroom authority, it was her investigative instincts that had been honed by decades of dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. She could smell a lie from across a courtroom. She could detect fraud in a person's body language before they even opened their mouth. She had developed an almost psychic ability to see through elaborate deceptions and expose the truth within minutes of hearing a case. Criminals who had fooled police, prosecutors, and even federal agents found themselves completely dismantled by Judge Judy's questioning. When she transitioned to television in 1996, Judge Judy brought all of this real-world experience with her, creating a show that wasn't just entertainment, it was a masterclass in justice, accountability, and the consequences of lying to authority. Over 25 seasons and more than 12,000 cases, she had encountered every type of scammer, fraudster, and entitled individual imaginable. She had destroyed the lives of insurance cheats, welfare fraudsters, rental scammers, and pathological liars with such devastating effectiveness that clips of her takedowns were studied in law schools across the country. Judge Judy's television success had made her one of the highest-paid personalities in entertainment history, earning $47 million per year and building a personal fortune of over $440 million. But money wasn't what drove her. It was her absolute dedication to truth, justice, and the principle that actions have consequences. She had never met a liar she couldn't expose, never encountered a fraudster she couldn't destroy, and never faced an entitled individual she couldn't humble. Her track record was perfect, and her methods were legendary. What separated Judge Judy from every other television judge was her team of investigators and researchers who worked behind the scenes to uncover the truth about every case before it ever reached her courtroom. These weren't just production assistants looking for interesting stories. They were former law enforcement officers, private investigators, and legal professionals who conducted real investigations into the backgrounds, financial records, and criminal histories of every person who appeared before Judge Judy. By the time a case reached her desk, she often knew more about the litigants than they knew about themselves. This investigative process was exactly how Judge Judy's team had uncovered Karen's pattern of insurance fraud 3 years before their courtroom confrontation. The anonymous tip about Karen's fake claims had triggered a comprehensive investigation that revealed not just the $50,000 slip and fall fraud, but an entire network of fabricated accidents, false injury claims, and systematic theft from insurance companies. Judge Judy's investigators had documented every fraudulent claim, photographed every fake injury, and compiled a case file that would have impressed federal prosecutors. But Judge Judy's true power went beyond investigation and legal authority. It was her psychological understanding of entitled individuals and her ability to push them into revealing their true nature under pressure. She had spent decades studying the behavior patterns of narcissists, sociopaths, and entitled individuals, learning exactly which buttons to push to make them expose themselves completely. She knew that people like Karen Thompson couldn't resist the urge to escalate when challenged, and she had perfected the art of creating situations where their own arrogance would destroy them. Judge Judy's preparation for Karen's case had been more thorough than any criminal investigation. She had studied Karen's social media posts, reviewed her shopping habits, analyzed her previous legal threats, and even interviewed some of the service workers Karen had terrorized over the years. She knew about Karen's history of screaming at restaurant managers, her pattern of threatening retail workers, and her tendency to demand special treatment wherever she went. Judge Judy had built a complete psychological profile of Karen Thompson before she ever set foot in the courtroom. More importantly, Judge Judy had recognized that Karen Thompson represented something dangerous and destructive in American society: the entitled individual who believes that money, privilege, and aggression can overcome any obstacle, including the law.
Judge Judy had encountered thousands of people like Karen over her career, but rarely had she found one whose arrogance was so complete and whose criminal behavior was so well documented. She saw Karen not just as another fraudulent litigant, but as an opportunity to send a message to every entitled individual in America about the consequences of believing yourself above the law. As Karen sat in that courtroom chair, completely unaware of the storm that was about to destroy her life, Judge Judy was armed with a case file that could have sent Karen to federal prison, a psychological profile that predicted her every move, and 5 decades of experience in destroying people who thought they were smarter than the law. Judge Judy had chosen to hear Karen's ridiculous fence case not because it was interesting television, but because she wanted to expose Karen's fraud on national television and show the world what happens when entitled criminals finally meet someone who can't be intimidated, manipulated, or fooled. The stage was set for the most devastating takedown in television history, and Judge Judy was ready to remind Karen Thompson and the entire world that some authority figures don't have managers. They have the power to end your freedom with a single word. The case began with Karen's confident smile as she presented her ridiculous fence complaint against elderly Mrs. Chen. "Your Honor, this fence is ruining my property values and causing me severe emotional distress. I demand $5,000 in damages." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed as she reviewed the surveyor's report, showing the fence was entirely on Mrs. Chen's property. "Miss Thompson,
This fence is legal and properly placed. Your case is frivolous." Karen's face flushed red. "Excuse me, but you obviously don't understand the situation here. I wasn't finished explaining why I deserve compensation for this trauma." Judge Judy's ice-cold response cut through Karen's entitled rambling like a knife through butter. "Ma'am, you will not interrupt me in my courtroom. This is a court of law, not your country club." Karen's voice rose to a shriek as she stood up, pointing her manicured finger directly at the judge. "I don't care who you think you are. I want to speak to your manager right now. You can't talk to me like that. I have rights." The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed with deadly precision. "Bailiff, arrest this woman for contempt of court immediately." The transformation on Karen's face from entitled rage to pure terror happened in milliseconds. "You can't arrest me! This is illegal! I'm calling my lawyer! I'm calling the news!" But the handcuffs were already clicking into place as the bailiff led her away, her designer heels echoing through the stunned courtroom. The audience erupted in applause as Judge Judy delivered her final verdict. "Case dismissed. And let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can intimidate a federal judge." If you're loving watching this entitled meltdown get exactly what it deserved, smash that like button and share this video with everyone who needs to see what happens when Karens meet real consequences. The clip of Karen's meltdown exploded across social media with the force of a nuclear bomb, racking up 75 million views in just 24 hours and spawning countless memes, remixes, and reaction videos. The hashtag #KarenVsJudgeJudy dominated trending topics for weeks as millions of Americans shared the satisfying moment of ultimate justice. But for Karen Thompson, the viral fame was just the beginning of her nightmare. Within 48 hours of her arrest, federal investigators had opened a full criminal investigation into Karen's insurance fraud network. Her mugshot became an internet sensation, and her husband, Richard, filed for divorce after discovering the extent of her criminal activities. The Westchester County neighborhood that had once feared her tantrums now openly celebrated her downfall. Mrs. Chen, the elderly neighbor Karen had tried to destroy, was awarded $50,000 in damages plus attorney fees, while Karen faced federal fraud charges that could send her to prison for up to 10 years. Karen's desperate attempts at damage control only made things worse. Her tearful apology video was immediately turned into comedy gold by internet trolls, and her claim that Judge Judy had violated her constitutional rights was laughed out of every courthouse in America. Legal experts used Karen's case as a perfect example of how entitled behavior and criminal fraud eventually catch up with everyone, no matter how privileged they think they are. Judge Judy's handling of the case became required viewing in law schools across the country, demonstrating the perfect balance of legal authority, investigative preparation, and psychological warfare that defines true judicial excellence. If this story of ultimate justice inspired you like it inspired millions of Americans, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share this video with everyone you know. This is exactly the kind of accountability that entitled criminals need to face in our society. The lesson was crystal clear. In America's courtrooms, your attitude doesn't determine the outcome. The evidence does. And sometimes it takes a legendary judge to remind entitled fraudsters that judges don't have managers. They have the power to make your worst nightmares become your new reality.